In the quiet hours before dawn, when the stars still hold their watch over sleeping villages and the first hints of light touch the edges of ancient hills, there lingers a longing older than any empire, older than the carved stones of forgotten temples, older even than the first stories told around flickering fires. Humans have always reached for one more hour, one more stretch of wakefulness to finish the hunt, guard the children, trade one more bundle of spices, or simply watch the moon travel its slow arc across the sky. This hunger for extended alertness runs through every civilization like an underground river, surfacing wherever people gathered to build, to explore, or to survive the long nights that once separated the living from their ambitions. Before anyone measured time with sand or water clocks, the desire showed itself in small, persistent acts, chewing bitter leaves found near streams, brewing infusions from bark and roots that sharpened the mind when exhaustion threatened to pull the body down. Early evidence appears in scattered traces across continents, hints that our ancestors noticed how certain plants kept the senses keen long after ordinary fatigue should have claimed them. They did not yet call these discoveries medicines or rituals. They simply returned to the same groves and clearings, carrying what they had learned through trial and quiet observation. Today, that same impulse has made caffeine the world's most widely used psychoactive substance, present in the morning routines of billions and embedded in the daily rhythms of cities that never quite sleep. Yet the path from those first tentative tastes to global prevalence remains wrapped in mystery. How did ancient peoples first identify the precise plants whose compounds could reliably push back the boundaries of tiredness? Theories suggest gradual experimentation, perhaps guided by watching animals that grew unusually lively after nibbling certain berries or leaves, or by noticing that travellers who carried particular seeds stayed sharper during long journeys. No single moment of discovery stands recorded. Instead, the knowledge seems to have emerged through countless small encounters across generations, each one adding a fragment to an unspoken map of stimulating flora. Consider how the olive trees of the Mediterranean still root themselves in soil, older than the Forum, older than the legions, older than the name Rome itself. They persist without regard for shifting borders or fallen capitals, just as the rivers continue their patient descent to the sea and buried chambers beneath later cities preserve painted walls and jars of perfumed oils that once scented the air of lives now vanished. In much the same way, the plants that carry caffeine endured long before humans learned their secret, growing in remote highlands and dense forests where only the most observant foragers would notice their effects. The question of first contact stays open to interpretation. Perhaps a herder tasted leaves after a storm flattened a branch into a pool of rainwater, or a healer tested roots during a season of endless rain, when rest became impossible. Each possibility carries the weight of lived necessity rather than deliberate invention. This universal craving for borrowed hours crosses every culture without exception. In high plateaus where thin air already tested endurance, people sought plants that lent clarity to the mind. Along trade routes that connected distant shores, the same substances travelled as quietly as stories, passed from hand to hand whenever someone needed to remain vigilant through the darkest watches. The pattern repeats across deserts, jungles and river valleys. Wherever human activity extended past natural cycles of light and rest, nature offered compounds that answered the demand. No civilization invented the need. Each one simply found its local solution, refining it through use until the knowledge became part of ordinary life. What unites these scattered beginnings is the enduring curiosity they spark even now. Standing at the edge of recorded history, we can trace the outlines of early stimulant use in archaeological residues and oral traditions, yet the precise spark that first linked a particular leaf or bean to sustained alertness stays elusive. That very uncertainty keeps the story alive, inviting us to imagine the moment a tired gatherer paused, tasted something unexpected, and noticed the world sharpen around them. Such discoveries did not arrive with fanfare, but through the patient accumulation of small observations that eventually shaped entire societies. So tell me, as these words reach you across whatever distance separates us, where are you listening from and what hour is it there? Whether the sun has just begun its climb or the night has already settled deep, your comment joins countless others in mapping the same ancient longing for one more hour onto the present. The desire itself has never changed. Only the plants we turn to and the stories we tell about how we first found them. In much the same way the olive trees of the Mediterranean still root themselves in soil older than the Forum, older than the legions, older than the name Rome itself, the wild tea plants of southern China and the misty highlands beyond endured through countless seasons of flood and drought, long before any human hand reached for them. These camellia shrubs, with their glossy leaves and delicate white blossoms, persisted without regard for shifting dynasties or vanished kingdoms, their roots drawing nourishment from the same red earth that once cradled the earliest villages. Rivers continued their patient descent toward distant coasts, carrying silt and secrets alike, while beneath later layers of terraced fields lay traces of older clearings, where leaves might have first fallen into steaming water by chance or quiet intention. The story most often repeated begins with the legendary Emperor Shen Nong, a figure said to have lived nearly 5,000 years ago, whose curiosity about plants led him to taste hundreds of herbs in a single day. One account tells of a leaf drifting from a nearby branch into his pot of boiling water, releasing a fragrance that sharpened his senses and eased his fatigue after long journeys across the realm. Yet such tales remain threads in a larger tapestry of possibility rather than fixed events, for they echo through later chronicles written centuries afterward and may reflect the accumulated wisdom of many nameless observers who noticed how certain leaves revived the body when weariness pressed close. Archaeological traces surface more gradually, with residues of tea compounds found in ancient pottery from western China dating back perhaps 3,000 years or more, though interpretations vary, and some residues could stem from related plants used in similar infusions. Textual references appear in early medical writings that describe brews prepared to aid digestion, clear the mind during long counsels, or sustain travellers across mountain passes where night fell swiftly and rest was scarce. These mentions treat tea less as a casual drink and more as a careful preparation, valued for its ability to push back the edges of exhaustion in a world where work stretched from dawn until the last light faded. Over generations, the practice shifted within Chinese culture itself, moving from something reserved for healers and scholars toward a daily companion shared in homes and markets. What began as a medicinal brew, often combined with ginger or other roots to balance its bitterness, gradually stood alone, its subtle flavours appreciated for their own sake, as communities grew larger and routines settled into patterns of planting, harvesting and exchange. People returned to the same groves season after season, refining methods of picking young leaves at just the right moment, drying them in the sun or over gentle heat, and storing them in jars that preserved their strength through winter months when alertness mattered most for guarding stores and planning the year ahead. From these Chinese heartlands the knowledge travelled outward, carried along paths that connected distant courts and monasteries. In Japan, the arrival of tea seeds and teachings from visiting monks sparked a distinct tradition, one that wove the plant into rituals of presence and reflection, rather than hurried necessity alone. Over centuries, the practice evolved into the measured steps of the tea ceremony, where the preparation itself became a way to mark time deliberately, offering participants a shared interval of calm focus amid the demands of feudal life and seasonal labours. Here too the underlying impulse remained familiar, a means to extend clarity through early mornings of meditation or late evenings of study, transforming what might have been ordinary fatigue into sustained attention. Trade routes extended the reach further still, with compressed bricks of tea moving alongside silk and spices across Central Asian passes and into the hands of merchants who valued its portability and lasting potency. Along these corridors the leaves crossed cultural boundaries without fanfare, adopted by new communities who adapted preparation to local tastes while retaining the core effect of sharpened awareness during long caravans or night watches. Eventually, the plant and its infusions reached ports that linked Asia to Europe and beyond, where demand grew among sailors and traders needing to stay vigilant across oceans, though each society encountered it through its own lens of necessity and curiosity, rather than as a single exported custom. The true origins of domestication stay open to interpretation, with some evidence pointing to early cultivation in the misty regions of Yunnan and Sichuan, where wild relatives still grow, while other theories suggest parallel discoveries in neighbouring areas where similar shrubs produced comparable effects. Perhaps a forager noticed animals becoming more alert after nibbling certain foliage, or a healer tested infusions during seasons when rest proved impossible amid floods or conflict. Each possibility carries the quiet weight of lived observation rather than sudden invention, reminding us that the plant offered its gift to those already seeking one more stretch of wakefulness. No single cradle claims certainty, yet the pattern of gradual recognition repeats across highlands and valleys, much as rivers keep finding their way to the sea, regardless of the names humans give their banks. What lingers from these beginnings is the way tea wove itself into the fabric of ordinary endurance, turning a simple leaf into a companion for moments when the night stretched long and ambitions refused to wait for daylight. The same hunger that once prompted tasting unknown plants now finds expression in countless cups prepared across continents, each one echoing those first tentative sips that sharpened the world just enough to carry on. Much like the camellia leaves that drifted into boiling water along forgotten Chinese trails, another dark berry caught the notice of herders in the highland forests of Ethiopia, where mist clung to the branches of wild shrubs long before any empire claimed the Horn of Africa. These plants, with their glossy foliage and clusters of crimson fruit, had already outlasted shifting rains and the rise of ancient kingdoms, whose names now rest only in eroded stone, their roots drawing from volcanic soil that whispered of deeper histories. One account, passed through generations of oral tradition rather than inscribed in royal annals, speaks of a goat herd named Kaldi, whose flock began to leap and dance after nibbling the berries, their sudden vigour stirring his own curiosity until he carried the strange fruit to a nearby monastery. Yet this tale, like so many origins, floats as a thread among possibilities, its details varying with each retelling and perhaps echoing the observations of many watchful wanderers who noticed how certain seeds sharpened the senses amid the long watches of the savannah night. From those misty slopes, the knowledge travelled slowly, carried first by travellers and traders who valued the roasted beans for their ability to sustain attention through hours when prayer demanded wakefulness. Sufi monks in the Arabian Peninsula adopted the brew during the 15th century or earlier, preparing it as a means to extend their nighttime devotions and deepen meditative focus, though records remain fragmentary and scholars continue to debate whether the practice emerged independently among Yemeni communities or arrived through earlier contacts across the Red Sea. The drink, bitter at first and often tempered with spices, became a companion for vigils that stretched until dawn, allowing the faithful to push against the limits of ordinary fatigue without the haze of stronger intoxicants. Here too the impulse echoed across cultures, a quiet alliance with a plant that offered clarity when rest could not be claimed. transforming solitary hours of reflection into sustained presence. As the beans moved northward along caravan routes, they found fertile ground in the bustling cities of the Arab world, where coffeehouses soon rose as gathering points for scholars, merchants and poets. In places like Cairo, Damascus, and later Istanbul, these establishments multiplied rapidly, serving as forums where ideas flowed as freely as the dark liquid itself, fueling debates on philosophy, astronomy, and commerce long into the night. Unlike the measured rituals surrounding tea, these spaces thrived on lively exchange, their patrons lingering over cups that sharpened wit and prolonged negotiations, turning what might have been fleeting conversations into extended explorations of trade routes and governance. The houses became centres of both intellect and practical affairs, their reputation spreading through word of mouth and attracting visitors who sought not only refreshment, but the pulse of current events and alliances. From these hubs, the beverage crossed into Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries, arriving first through Venetian and Ottoman trade connections, before taking root in cities from London to Paris. There it transformed social habits and business practices alike, with coffee houses emerging as neutral ground where citizens from varied ranks could mingle without the haze of alehouses, discussing news, politics, and ventures over steaming cups that kept minds alert for hours of discourse. The drink soon earned the nickname the sober drink, its popularity surging as it coincided with expanding markets and the need for reliable wakefulness amid growing cities where opportunities and obligations rarely paused for daylight. Yet adoption varied by region and temperament, some embracing it as a stimulant for Enlightenment salons, while others viewed the new custom with suspicion, their debates revealing how each society adapted the bean to its own rhythms of ambition and conversation. The global reach of coffee, however, carried darker currents once European powers turned to large-scale cultivation. Colonial enterprises established plantations across the Americas, the Caribbean, and parts of Asia, often relying on enslaved or indentured labor to meet rising demand. A pattern that intertwined the crop with exploitation and forced migrations on a scale that reshaped economies for centuries. These operations, driven by competition among Dutch, French, British, and Portuguese interests, turned coffee into a commodity of empire, its trade routes intersecting with those of sugar and cotton, while local growers in origin regions sometimes lost control over their own harvests. Theories about the earliest cultivation remain contested, with some evidence suggesting deliberate planting in Yemen as early as the 14th century, others pointing to earlier wild harvesting in Ethiopia, or even parallel developments in nearby highlands, where similar shrubs produced comparable effects. Archaeological traces and genetic studies continue to refine these possibilities, reminding us that no single narrative captures every moment of discovery or transfer. What persists across these journeys is the way coffee answered the same enduring human urge that tea had met in distant valleys, the desire to stretch wakefulness just a little further, whether for prayer, trade, or the simple refusal to let night claim the day's unfinished work. Each cup carried forward that quiet negotiation with time, its spread shaped as much by chance encounters and cultural adaptation as by deliberate ambition, leaving behind a legacy that still unfolds in every morning ritual and late conversation around the world. Yet beneath the roasted beans and steeped leaves that travelled those caravan routes and colonial docks, a quieter alchemy was always at work, one that did not depend on empire or monastery, but on the precise chemistry between a plant compound and the human mind itself. Caffeine, the same molecule that surfaces in so many unrelated species, slips past the blood-brain barrier with deceptive ease, settling where adenosine receptors ordinarily gather the day's accumulating fatigue into a gentle pressure towards sleep. By occupying those sites without triggering their usual drowsiness signal, It leaves the brain's own excitatory messengers freer to circulate, sharpening attention and delaying the natural ebb that would otherwise draw eyelids downward. Blood flow adjusts, heart rate edges upward in measured increments, and the familiar lift arrives not as a jolt, but as a sustained refusal of ordinary limits, a chemical extension of wakefulness that ancient users could never have named yet learned to seek with remarkable consistency across continents and centuries. This mechanism, refined through countless generations of trial and observation, explains why the same impulse surfaced wherever people encountered plants that happened to concentrate the compound. In the shaded understories of Mesoamerican forests, the cacao tree offered its seeds not merely as tribute or ritual offering, but as a source of clarity for long-distance traders and warriors who needed steady focus across days of travel or preparation. The frothy, sometimes spiced preparations of the Maya and later Aztec courts carried a milder yet persistent stimulation, its effects noted in codices and oral accounts that describe heightened endurance during ceremonial vigils or strategic councils. Far to the south, the guarana vine of Amazonian clearings yielded seeds whose caffeine content often exceeded that of coffee itself, ground into pastes or infused in waters that sustained indigenous groups through seasonal hunts and communal labours when rest remained scarce. Yerba mate drawn from the holly-like shrubs of the Paraguayan and Argentine grasslands became similarly woven into daily rhythms of the Guarani and later mestizo populations, its gourd shared in circles that prolonged conversations, storytelling, and work sessions well past sunset. Meanwhile, the kola nut of West African woodlands travelled along trade paths as both currency and companion, its bitter segments chewed to maintain alertness during market negotiations or nighttime journeys, later finding its way into the effervescent tonics of the industrial age without losing the core effect that had first recommended it to generations of farmers and merchants. Across these scattered sources, the common thread remained the same negotiation with time that tea and coffee had already answered in their own regions. Stimulants did not simply invigorate isolated bodies, they altered the scale at which societies could operate. Markets extended their hours, administrative records accumulated through lamplit evenings, and military campaigns gained marginal advantages from troops who could march or plan without the immediate collapse that fatigue normally enforced. In the great plantations that later supplied global demand, the very routines of cultivation and harvest were shaped by the need to keep labourers moving through the same chemical logic, though often under conditions that turn the plant's gift into an instrument of extraction rather than personal choice. Theories about the precise timing of these expansions continue to shift, with new genetic mapping and archival fragments, yet the pattern is clear enough. Wherever caffeine-bearing crops took hold at scale, they supported denser networks of exchange, longer periods of coordinated labour, and the gradual redefinition of what counted as a full day's accomplishment. What such dependence ultimately reveals is less a modern affliction than an ancient pattern made newly visible. The human urge to claim one additional hour, whether for devotion, commerce, or simple unfinished thought, has always sought external allies when internal reserves ran thin. In contemporary routines, this same impulse appears in the first cup before dawn commutes, the afternoon refill that bridges meetings, and the late-night preparation that stretches deadlines, each instance echoing the monastery vigils or caravan rests of earlier eras. Modern life amplifies the pattern through constant illumination and digital demands, yet the underlying bargain remains unchanged. A temporary override of natural rhythms in exchange for heightened presence, with the understanding that the debt of rest will eventually be paid. Scholars continue to debate the long-term balance of benefits and costs, noting both the measurable gains in focused output and the subtle ways repeated use recalibrates individual thresholds for fatigue. Thus, the enduring quest for that one more hour of productivity threads through every chapter of this story, from the first accidental discoveries in highland forests and misty valleys to the global systems that now deliver caffeine in countless forms. Each generation adapts the same molecular assistance to its own pressures, carrying forward the quiet recognition that time's boundaries, while real, have never been entirely fixed. If these reflections on our shared history have sparked your curiosity about how a single compound continues to shape daily life across cultures, consider liking this video, leaving a comment to share where you're listening from, and subscribing to the channel for further explorations. Your support helps sustain these journeys into the past and their connections to the present.